Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to Nice Tuesdays.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Have you warmed up yet?
No.
Not quite yet. Fair.
I never will.
I don't think I have either. First of all, how was Sydney? I feel like, you were there fairly recently.
Yeah, I got back last week. It was very intense. So I worked on Kylie's show with a big team for Sydney World Pride, so that was nail-biting. I had to do like a magic trick to get Danny Minogue to like just appear on stage out of nowhere, and it was all very stressful, but it was very good. Had a good time, yeah.
It looked epic. I mean, I was wondering if you could just maybe start by talking us through that project and how you approached it, because, as I say, it looked incredible.
Yeah, well, we've been working with Kylie for a few years, and obviously we worked on the disco album, but that was mostly during lockdowns. We didn't get to do any live shows. And since kind of coming back into the real world, we've worked on a couple of shows. I usually co-direct with Rob Sinclair, who's a production designer, show director, but he couldn't make this one, so I had to do it on my own. It was pretty scary. It was like 20,000 people, big queer festival, and also like live streamed across the world. So it was pretty intense. It was a big ensemble. We put together the visuals, worked with the choreography, the staging. Yeah, it was good fun.
Was that one of the first times you've worked on the full scope of all of that stuff, from the visuals to the choreography to everything?
I've done some other shows, but this is the first time that I was like the one that would get in trouble if everything went wrong. It was probably my biggest sort of individual performance that I'd worked on before, yeah.
Well, congratulations. I mean, it looked amazing, yeah.
Thank you.
Kind of gutted I wasn't there, but I guess, as I said in the introduction, you've been immersed in the music industry right from the get-go in 2007, when you kind of were first illustrating flyers for the indie music scene in London. I guess first off, just to give us a bit of context maybe, can you just describe how the music scene helped you get your start in design and illustration?
Yeah, I mean, back in 2007, this is sort of like early internet. This is the generation of indie music. I don't mean by genre, but like independent music scene, streaming had just sort of, illegal streaming anyway, had just sort of started. MySpace era, basically. I'm showing my age now. I liked drawing, I liked illustrating, but I wasn't very good at drawing anything. So I just was drawing lettering because I was okay at bubble writing. It was the time where people were throwing loads of parties and they would have like 25 DJs. So there wasn't much room for any figurative illustration on these posters. So I just sort of started drawing these flyers and posters that were all over East London at the time. And through the scene, I met people who have gone on to found like big record labels and become A&R at labels, and that kind of brought me into the music industry through that sort of lo-fi party scene. And I just really loved working in music, and it was always my goal. And I looked up to a lot of designers that worked in the music industry, who've since, most of them turned out to be rubbish human beings. But at the time, I thought they were great. Yeah.
And I guess music has, continued to be, as we mentioned, like a huge part of your practice and Studio Moross's work as well, even to this day. Yeah,
we love working in music. It's a really challenging industry, as I'm sure anyone here who works in music, whether they're a musician or a creator, there's never really great money, but there's a lot of room for creativity. There's a lot of room for individuality. So it's something I've always wanted to retain in like my practice and in the practice of the studio. And it's certainly something that I think attracts people to coming to work at Studio Moross, because it's a joint interest that we all have. Yeah, whether it's pop music, bangers, or something a bit more left field, like everyone in the studio enjoys music in one way or another. So they're always excited to work with musicians.
And I guess, one question about, you mentioned the kind of indie scene back in 2007-8, I guess. Do you think it's as easy today to get into working in the music industry as a designer or illustrator, or has that scene slightly shifted? And it's maybe a slightly different question, but...
I find it hard to answer these questions because I feel like it's hard to have a job right now, let alone getting into an industry. So it's kind of hard to respond with any like clarity as to how it is now versus then. I feel like back then, having any online presence was different, like made you stand out, and now it's like we're in a sea of online presence, so it's much harder to stand out. But there's certainly more platforms, more outcomes, more bands, more interest in music now more than ever. So in some ways there are more doors, but it's just, making a living out of it, I think, is challenging. It's challenging for a company like ours that have been doing it for years. So as an individual, I'm sure it's also really challenging.
I'm sure music will come up again and again throughout this conversation. Yeah. I also wanted to say that, obviously behind us there's visuals from Studio Moross's work and Aries' work as well. I wanted to move on now to talk about how you began your own studio, because you've spoken about in the past how you almost fell into running your own studio, I think is the words you used. What have you found hardest about making that shift from independent creative, which you, as you were when we were first kind of talking about, to being a studio owner?
Well, I think for me, the reason I started the studio was just because I wanted to make more than just one type of work, and I felt like I didn't have necessarily a fully rounded skill set to create and produce every single piece of work in its entirety. So I wanted to work with other people, and I also just enjoy working with other people. I think one of the biggest challenges of being a creative is working alone, and a lot of people, I'm sure, in this room sit at home alone every day making things, and it's quite a lonely profession. So I've just always wanted to build an environment of people to work with and share style and experience and conversation. And I've always enjoyed being really bossy. So I think having a studio suits me. I've had to get better at that over the years, but I really just enjoy the nature of teamwork. I know that's a really cliche thing, but it's something I really treasure.
I think teamwork, that collaboration thing is a really interesting point, because, as you say, as an independent creative, you're often working on your own deadlines, or at least to your own kind of schedule. But actually, that sense of actually you have to collaborate with the team and work with the team is
and so much of what we do isn't necessarily what goes onto the page. It's we design the processes of making the work. We design how we communicate with each other. We design how we want to work within the industry, and a lot of that is much bigger practice than graphics or video. It's a lot more holistic, and that's the thing that keeps my job interesting for me. I'm well over 11. It's our studio 11th anniversary this month, actually. So you have to keep things developing, and I don't want to work in the same industry that existed 10 years ago. I want to be in a new, progressive, accessible industry, and that's something that, as the studio, we really pioneer.
Yeah, I'm really keen that we come onto that, and we will definitely talk about that. I mean, I guess, what have the biggest difficulties been or challenges been when it comes to running your own studio and learning? Because it sounds like you almost have had to learn that as you've gone, right?
Yeah.
How to run a studio.
Still learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've only ever worked in for myself and within the studio. I've not had many experiences of working in other teams and companies, so I've really just had to make stuff up as I go along and borrow and listen to other people about how they experience business, but also work practices and things like that. So a lot of it is all just working that shit out as you go, but also, really digging into capitalism and how it functions and how we can make work in a way that doesn't feel harmful or bring harm to whether it's our team or the people who we're making the work with or for, or the wider world is a big part of how we practice.
I wanted to touch on this because I think you kind of mentioned that you've learned from a lot of other people about how to run a business.
Or how not to run.
Well, exactly.
Mostly how not to, yeah.
So I was going to say, because I guess now it feels like you're pushing the industry to do more, particularly in terms of inclusivity. I watched a talk you did at Semi-Permanent Festival last year, and you talked about how it's impossible to make inclusive work without inclusive teams. I appreciate that was a 45-minute talk or a 50-minute talk, and we don't have that much time, and I guess it's one question, but I'm sure our audience here would love to hear just your thoughts on, inclusivity at Studio Moross and how you've thought about it.
Big question.
It is a big question.
I think the important thing is that you have to consider who is making the work, how the work is being made, who the work is being made for, what that work is saying, who's going to access that work, who's going to be affected by it. I mean, it's like just the infinite chain of thought that you have to have around everything. And I think in terms of the studio, our approach is that everyone is different, has different ways of learning, communicating, understanding, connecting. Like, the idea is just not to make any assumptions about anyone or anything, and just constantly be listening and asking questions and understanding each other and the client and the audience, and just, yeah, I think that's our goal. Obviously, we can always be improving and making things better, but yeah, I mean, there are not that many queer-owned or trans-owned companies, let alone design studios, so we have become someone that people turn to for those types of projects, which I really enjoy, because we want to be making work about those topics, and I'm keen to be active in creating work for my community as well. That's really important to me.
One of the things that I found really refreshing and interesting as someone who works for a company as well about that talk was you were talking about policies and the importance of policies in a company, and how sometimes they can be seen as a bit, unsexy. Yeah, right. And actually how important certain policies are, and to have that kind of
They're
structure.
at a design talk. They don't want to hear about corporate policy.
Is this just me? Sorry.
No. I mean, it's something I'm very passionate about. But I always thought like rules and hierarchies and policies were like bad, and I just wanted to live in a flat hierarchy with utopia and all of that shit. And then I realized that it was a bad idea. We write a lot of our policies together. Some of them we don't write together, but we work together to make systems so that we don't have bias, ultimately. Like, if you don't have a policy for something, then you're judging, you're making decisions without rules, and if you make decisions without rules, you favor or unfavor people, and so that is important in the workplace as well.
Well, we'll move on from policies now.
I mean, I could talk about it, but like everyone here's like, come on, let's hear the gossip. Yeah.
You wrote a piece for us a couple of years ago now about the challenges you faced when changing your name publicly, particularly as someone with their own studio platform and profile. I guess, what are some of the difficulties that you encountered there? And also, there were some positive aspects to that change as well.
I mean, I have to tell you, like, before I wrote that article, I was absolutely terrified. Like, I think two of my friends are here that I sat at their house, like, on a chair, like, read them the article aloud, and I was like, is this okay? Like, it felt so incredibly emotional to change my name in such a public way. I mean, a lot of people experience name changes, and it's very personal and emotional thing to do just in your own community, but, like, you have this public-facing persona that you have to also sort of navigate. And actually after it was done, it was whatever. That was like a walk in the park. But up until that point, I was really terrified. But it has been quite weird to publicly transition and go through that process. But it's important to be visible and like show people that you can change your name. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. Like, people will adapt, and your business won't collapse, and all of these things that I catastrophized for myself didn't happen. So hopefully that means that other people out there will, there's not been that many public name changes in the world, like probably name about 10 or something. So it was very scary, but now I just have to deal with everyone asking what's my star sign, and then I'm like, I'm an Aries, and they're like, oh my God, you're and then I'm like, I chose the name myself, So that's kind of the bigger problem now of the choice of name.
That was part of the reasoning,
I didn't think about it, like, on that level, but that is the consequence. So if anyone here is thinking about changing their name, star signs are hard, like, not every star sign works as a name, but if you have a good star sign name, then don't pick it unless you're open to having a conversation with mostly queer people about what star sign you are.
Every day. Including on stage, apparently.
Yeah.
Apologies. When it comes to, I guess, inclusivity in the creative industry, it's kind of something we touched on just now, but how far do you feel we've come in the past 5 years, 10 years? And I guess on the other side, how much further do you feel we need to go? And I'm assuming it's a lot further.
I mean, we've made such a small impact on the industry and then the world at large. There's still so much to work on. I think, only in the last 5 to 10 years have we managed to get interns paid. which is such a simple thing. And it's still, like, there's still plenty of people out there who aren't being paid fairly for their work, let alone access to work for people with low incomes. There's still so much racism and bias and sexism in the industry, as well as homophobia, transphobia, all of these things. Workplaces are still not accessible. They're still harmful places. There's so much work to be done. And that's, something that I always talk about, because like my talk in Sydney was about how everything under your roof is your fault as an employer, because that's a lesson I learned as an employer, is that like no one is at fault other than you as the employer when something happens at work. And, how do we operate under white supremacy? How do we operate under capitalism? And like, how do we fix this shit that's so fundamentally broken without changing the entire structure of society? And like, design is an area that I'm in, so it's an area that I can try and make changes in. But you've got to start somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like, a long way to go still.
Definitely,
and,
yeah. But, we are seeing more visibility at conferences and talks and things like that. People are talking about getting paid, making sure other people are getting paid. We are having these conversations in workplaces now that formerly weren't happening. I think that creates more harm in some cases, because these are topics that lots of people don't know how to talk about carefully, with consideration and thought. But, at least the words are coming out of people's mouths a little bit, or on Slack, or whatever, which is somewhat more terrifying. But, I think the fact that we're even having this conversation now, this never in a million years would this conversation have happened 10 years ago at Nicer Tuesdays. So the fact that we're even talking about this stuff in the design industry is important, yeah.
Is there a danger that, I guess, with people understanding a bit more the language around such issues, there's a tendency to pay lip service to them without actually doing the groundwork? Yeah,
all the time. I mean, we get briefed in jobs all the time where me and the entire team, Ellen, who's here, has a special mug trick. You can see you, Ellen, that she holds over her mouth when the client says an awkward thing about something that we have to just sit there and we're all like, keep a straight face, guys. Because, these conversations that clients are having to us about we've brought you on because we want blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, we're those guys today. We still experience that all the time. So lots of mugs on Zoom calls to hide the awkward smiles.
Enormous, like, Sports Direct mugs that cover your entire face.
We need to get some Sports Direct mugs. Except, no, not Sports Direct.
Not Sports Direct,
Definitely
obviously.
Not.
Definitely not.
Definitely not Sports Direct, no.
We are not endorsing Sports Direct here on stage.
Couldn't have picked a worse company.
They're just the biggest mugs I've ever seen. I mean,
Okay.
I don't even know how you get them. You can't. Do you buy them from the shop? Anyway.
No more airtime.
We'll move on. I'd love to get your thoughts as well on visual culture more broadly. About, again, 5 or 6 years ago you spoke to one of my colleagues on the site about how you felt the world of design was too homogenized and everything was kind of looking the same.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to ask you this question, but when you look at the world of design today, do you feel there is more space for self-expression, for individuality, or is it still feeling very identikit?
Well, this crossed my mind, actually, when I was in Sydney for semi-permanent, because I was speaking to a lot of Aboriginal designers, and there were a lot of speakers who were talking about using their practice and their cultural work, like in their design and arts practice. And I just thought, this is so exciting, because now that we're actually standing out and calling out cultural appropriation, or people appropriating other visual cultures in their work that is not their own, we are now seeing the rise and the emergence of more authentic work made by people from those cultures. So we are getting design trends and worlds from people who are directly influenced by their own backgrounds, made by those people, not being copied by Western white people, whatever you want to call it. And that's really exciting, because I think we aren't just all copying each other anymore. We're actually going to see the emergence of design trends from other countries, from other communities, being adopted and used by those countries and those communities, and heralded and put out into the commercial world, and celebrated and developed and designed. And I think, we've seen that tonight. So I think that's really an exciting thing, and that I hadn't thought about that when I wrote that piece. with the Uni of Underground. But yeah, I'm so excited to see authentic work from people who are inspired by their backgrounds, their communities, the spaces in which they grew up in, and new trends and new design worlds built from that.
And that, I guess, that's work that, I guess you also need people to be interested in commissioning that work and supporting that work as well.
I think that's slowly happening, whether it be lip service or tokenism for now, but, eventually these trends will become part of the design fabric of the world, and, they'll grow roots, and hopefully that will, determine a whole range of new design like trends, like I said, that we'll be talking about in 50 to 100 years. I hope so, anyway. Yeah.
That's a really positive view of the future, because I think
there's not a lot of positive views on this future that we are in. So yeah,
we'll take it.
I'll take it.
Another, I guess you talked about the trends there, which that word is, I guess, can be a bit
trends.
negative.
Yeah.
And I don't want to kind of touch on that in this question, but I guess nostalgia is something that you've brought to a few of your recent projects. The Spice Girls tour visuals, I think you said were kind of, they were kind of nostalgic, but with a nice bit of modernity in there as well. And your recent work for Parklife Festival 2023 also leans into some really fun aspects of nostalgia. I guess what appeals to you about bringing those slightly older references into your work?
I mean, I think nostalgia is just inherently powerful because it's emotional. It connects people to that warm and fuzzy feeling. And I think there's not that much, there are not that many emotional tools in design that we can use necessarily that do that. So for me, nostalgia is really exciting. It's also, for like the Spice Girls, we had a huge archive of decades of visual design, of culture, of fashion, of trash, to dig through and celebrate and rework. Like Mariana is here, the type designer that reworked the original typeface. So it was nostalgic, but it's also been brought into the now. And yeah, I think we were just excited by that tool, and it really resonates with people when they see something on a screen at a gig and they remember something from their childhood. I mean, it resonated with me. I was Posh Spice in the school play, like those things. Yeah, I'm also posh, so it kind of works. But those things, like, they tie together your present and your past, and I think I love playing with that. And it's also can be truly authentic because you're digging into your own memories and history, and and other people connect with your memories and your history, and it's a way of creating sort of a space around something as sort of simple as a gig. Yeah.
The Parklife work is so fun. It looks like you and the team had an amazing amount of fun doing it. Can you just talk us through?
I mean, we've been working with them for a long time now, and one of their key cornerstones of the Parklife brand, who Guy Field, who used to work in the studio, has always been pioneering, is like Easter eggs. Like, we love Easter eggs. We love to put things inside of things forever. And now the brand has been going for so long, we like put itself inside itself. It's like infinity. But yeah, the most recent work we did was recreating the Prodigy video for the launch of the film, and that was a lot of fun. Like, we basically took the original video and created our own version of it in an animated form, and it was really good fun. Yeah. It
looks amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like if anyone hasn't seen it yet, definitely check it out.
It makes you want to go raving.
Yeah. But that was also where the nostalgia came in, because I feel like you used the Parklife logo and put it on some brands, like old brands. Is that right?
Oh yeah,
like Snickers.
Yeah. We were referencing old rave flyers, and we sort of sorted all the old rave flyers into like themes. And one of the themes was like dupes, or like sort of fake things. So like we remade like Marmite as the Parklife logo, or like all these old rave flyers that referenced products, and yeah, had a good time with that. Yeah.
Nice. We are going to move on to some audience questions now.
Yeah, great.
There were some great ones, but these are going to go all over the place. There's no theme or rhyme or reason to these.
Excited.
But, first question is from Craig. Do you or have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Yeah, all the time. Right now? No, I think I was very blessed for being like a very obnoxiously confident person. But that doesn't mean that I don't experience moments where, especially as I've gotten older, where I'm not as cool, not as confident, and not as aware of like what's going on in the world potentially. So yeah, definitely. I think sometimes that, am I good at my job? Like, should I even do this anymore? You know, when I was in Australia last week, I was having to make these really intense decisions and was like, am I even qualified to make these decisions? And let's just hope. Yeah, I was, and it was fine. But, you know, it happens to me all the time. And sometimes when I'm in these very intense, scary situations, it comes out more, yeah.
It's interesting that, like, yeah, the kind of confidence of youth, but you actually need that expertise and experience that you have from a few years in the industry to actually make those big calls.
Yeah, I think also you just have to go with it sometimes. And I think one of my solutions to imposter syndrome is to just prep a little bit more. Like sit down and spend an hour just looking over what I'm working on and just reassure myself that I know what I'm doing and this is the plan and okay, it will be all right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair. Just thinking about Kylie, I always think that it really shows your age when someone says Kylie to you, who do you think of? Because for me, there's only one Kylie, but I feel like younger people think that maybe Kylie's someone else. Don't know who that could be. Anyway, sorry.
I'm not going to answer that one.
Next question is from Jem. How important do you think it is to spend time in art college? How much did it affect your path?
So again, it goes back to like my individual experience. I was privately educated. I went into art school, relatively straightforward process of coming out of school, going into uni. I don't think that art school was necessary for me. Also, when I was at art school, it was probably 90% cheaper than it is now. I personally don't think going to art school is necessary. I don't think going to university is necessary. I think so many people have access to self-teach and train themselves online, and I think that's a really valid and brilliant way of getting into industry. I think art school is a time to carve out space for you to work things out and experiment and do things without an audience potentially, but it's not essential. And I think, you know, we should be encouraging people to not go to university and get in and get access to training and industry through other means, which is something that we, you know, try and do by bringing people in from school age into our spaces and give them an experience of a working environment. Because I think the statistic is just 3 positive experiences of a workplace for a young person, specifically as well, marginalized young people, can increase their salaries by like 25 to 30%, just by having a positive experience at a workplace. So those are the sorts of things we can all be doing by working with young people and giving them positive experiences of work to make their futures better. Yeah.
The next question is from Luke. How did you make graphic design work for you financially? Was it hard at times?
Again, I think it's difficult for me to answer this question. Like, I had financial privilege when I was growing up, so I didn't necessarily need to make graphic design my everything, like to pay the bills. And I did work when I was at uni, so I was working independently. Graphic design is a really difficult place to make money. I also worked as an illustrator, whereas at the time when I was coming up in like the mid to late 2010s, illustration was booming. Like, I kid you not, like you could get a campaign for like 250 grand, like at that time. Like, and now the same budget for that project would be 25 grand. So it was a very different time. It was when art buyers and ad agencies used to look at physical portfolios, and it wasn't online. It was like in-person interviews. It was like Mad Men era, but like not that long ago. So it's a very different time than it is now. But I think just my advice would be to check your hourly rates, check your day rates, make sure you're working at a competitive level, make sure you can afford your practice and what you're doing, and calculate everything that you need to spend money on, and make sure you're really charging your true value as well as what you cost to, like, as what it costs to make the work physically, like your lights, your power, your computer, your subscriptions. Don't forget anything that costs you money. Include that in what you charge.
The next question, another question about advice from Therese. Do you have any advice for a small studio taking the leap to hire staff for the first time, which I'm assuming is something, you will have gone through and potentially agonized about a few years ago?
Yeah, hiring is a really beautiful thing. I hold it so high in my, in what I do in terms of the process of hiring. It's very, very, very challenging, and it takes a lot of thought and care to work through the process of hiring, and you have to really think about everything. So I think my advice would be to really consider what you need from someone who's coming into your team. Also what they be aware that someone is never going to fit your job description. You're always going to have to adapt to them, and that's the beautiful thing, is that you'll find more things through the person and what their skills and interests are than what you want them to have. And you'll find your company will grow in so many different directions. And Studio Moross has been, I think we've had over 30 employees in the 11 years that we've been running, and every single employee has brought something new, different vibe, different interest, different taste, different history, different experiences to the work. And also we work with wider freelancers and collaborators. So the studio is the great, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and it continues to develop and grow beyond me and everything. So yeah.
That's a lovely way of thinking about it, because I feel like lots of companies think about hiring as, we need to inculcate someone into our culture and they need to be part of our brand or whatever. But actually, you're saying they can bring their own interests in, and you need to nurture that and encourage that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I could definitely be better at. But I think you're never going to ever find anyone who cares as much about the job as you are, as you care as a director of a company. So you have to get to grips with that. A lot of people are they don't care. And it's they don't care. It's a fucking job. It's not that important to most people. They just want to come to work, have a nice time, and go home. You have to understand that as an employer, that is the agreement, And if you're lucky, you do find people who are passionate, and in the time in which they're with you, they give you what they exchange, and you make great things together, and you develop relationships. But I think also boundaries, really important as an employer. Your staff aren't your friends, they're not your family, they are people who agree to come to work for a certain amount of money and go home at the end of the day, and it's not personal when people want to leave. I always say to my staff, if you want to leave, that's totally fine. Talk to me, I'm not going to alienate you, you get to stay part of the team to some degree forever. All the people who have left, they come back, and some people leave and actually come back into employment. Some people come back with their babies and their families and hang out and have a cup of tea, So it's always important to create an environment that's boundaried but also open, yeah.
And a final question from Hayley. How do you convince a client to push their brief, or do you never have to? I
mean, I think really in a former life, I was probably a salesperson, like a car salesman or something. My team will often throw me into a situation where I need to somehow twist, dare I say, the nipples of whoever is talking to me to try and get them to where I want them to, where we, essentially want them to go. I think a lot of it is listening, firstly, to what someone wants, and then reflecting back to them, your thoughts about their ideas, and then also making suggestions, and not being afraid to say, I don't think that's a good idea, or this doesn't work. And as long as you have something to back up your opinion, I think that's a totally okay way to approach something, especially if you feel like their idea crosses a boundary or a line in creatively or culturally or whatever. We do spend a lot of time guiding people in another direction, but I'm not one of those designers that's like, this is my idea, and if you don't want to do it, fuck off. Like, absolutely not. I still think the client is right the majority of the time, and so much of the work that we've done has been guided by the client. And even though I might sit there and be so annoyed of the changes that we have to make, ultimately, like, the work turns out better because of it. So you have to have sort of a balance between the two.
Aries, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for joining us and for sharing those stories and insights.
Thank
Aries
you.
Moross,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.